Hi, I'm Dr. Gerald Alpern, and I'm here to tell you the story of Vets for Vets. It's really a wonderful story. It tells the story about discovering new and almost miraculous ways to help vets. I'm going to start by going back decades and decades where the story starts. I was a neuropsych technician at Valley Forge Army Hospital right after the Korean War, and I was treating Korean veterans. What I was doing is I was a ward master, and we were administering insulin shock therapy. What that is you lay the veteran out, you inject him filled with insulin until he goes into a coma, a horrible coma that lasts for a couple of hours, and we brought them out. Now, I thought I was doing a really good thing. That's, after all, what the Army was teaching me to do. Later, I found out that years earlier, in a medical journal, The Lancet, it described research on insulin therapy, and in fact, they called it inhuman and ineffectual. And yet the Army was doing it for years later, and I was part of that. That was the beginning of the story. I found out after that, with more study, that the Army frequently does things, and the VA frequently does things that are not for the benefit of the veteran or the soldier, but for the veterans and the soldiers being effective for the Army. Let me tell you a story. During the First World War, when soldiers were in the trenches and they would have a psychological breakdown and they couldn't fight anymore, they were sent for electric shock therapy. And what that wasn't to help them overcome depressions. That was to be so painful that they would rather go back to the front lines and fight than have any more electric shocks. And it goes on even to today. In the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq, if a soldier collapses emotionally, they give them things like antipsychotic medications to get him back on the front lines. It's a horrible story, and it goes back a long, long ways. So, back to the story. After I left the Army, I went to graduate school, completed my degree, and ended up at Indiana University Medical School for 15 years, where I did research and clinical work. I was a professor, and then I went into private practice. In 1975, I moved and went into full-time private practice, where I did see a lot of vets, mostly Vietnam vets. Now, the problem there was these vets did not want to be seen by mental health professionals. The ideal client for psychologists are self-motivated people that come in with problems, and they want to talk to you about their problems. They're looking for solutions. The vets that came to me and my colleagues were suffering from what is universally known about vets. They don't like to talk about their experiences. They won't. They keep them private, and they don't think anybody can help them. Well, I was pretty unsuccessful with those vets, as were my colleagues. And that lasted up until about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, when something new and fresh happened. I was approached by Paul Anderson, a wilderness guide, and he had the idea of taking vets up into the wilderness for weekends, paying for everything, for their transportation, for everything, grouping them together and taking them into the wilderness, which he had a strong belief had real therapeutic beneficial effects. It was an interesting project, and I decided to join him. So in preparation for that, I said, well, I've got to learn more about veterans and their problems. So I started reading all the academic literature. This is how you treat trauma, that's how you treat trauma, these are the therapies. And they were the same therapies that I had been trying for years and years that didn't really work very well with vets. And then I turned to something new. I turned to books that were written actually by vets, men vets, women vets, who had returned from Iraq and Afghanistan. And there I began to understand the story. There I began to see what they went through, what they did, what was really so horrific to them and why they were so silent. Armed with that information, I began making 3 years of trips up into the wilderness with groups of veterans, and it was miraculous and amazing. And that's where the story of Vets for Vets actually started. We all know there's massive vet problems. They come back, they're drug addicted, they're depressed. They suicide at the rate of 22 per day. And that's more than is killed by all of the active combat in both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It was a real tragedy. So I was motivated to help, and I began going on these trips. And now I'm going to tell you what I learned from those trips. I learned that when vets got together, they changed completely. They felt comfortable because they were among other people who understood what they went through, who understood their experiences, who understood how they became, what they became, and some of the terrible things that they did themselves. So whereas when I was in my office trying to treat vets, they wouldn't talk at all. When they were surrounded around a campfire by other vets, they began telling stories. First, stories about, the snafus or the strange or funny things that happen in any organization. But after a while, they began to open up and tell the stories of the horrors that they saw, the crimes that they felt they committed, the guilts they had, their interactions with civilians, and it was amazing. They could tell the stories, but more amazing than them telling the stories was the reaction of the vets that were surrounding them. They were laughing, they were cheering, they were doing things that seemed strange to me, but the vets themselves who were telling the stories knew that they were being accepted, that they weren't being judged, that they were able to tell their stories in a way that allowed them the relief that that kind of holding in of all those horrors just festered inside of them. Then I also found out that the wilderness itself that we had taken them at was a new experience for them. That the wilderness, which Paul Anderson told me was therapeutic, in fact was therapeutic. Their relationship to the lands that they had fought to save, they began to appreciate what they were. We put them on solo trips, we put them on various kinds of hikes, we talked with them, and they loved the wilderness. So from all these, and I talked to them, of course, while I was on the trips, I would ask them, well, how's the VA treated you? And how various therapeutic experience worked or not worked? And so I found out their experiences with the VA, their experiences with the classic therapists, and how they were rejected, how they were forced to take pill after pill after pill, which is, after all, a very cheap way to treat vets instead of correctly diagnosing them and treating them. So they were on many, many pills. And if they stopped taking the pills, the VA said, well, you're not cooperative, so we can't treat you anymore. It was just a collection of horrible stories. So from these stories, and from what I learned by reading the books, their books, and what I learned from being with them for 3 years, 12, 15 trips into the wilderness with different groups, I learned a lot. And I developed new and innovative ways to help these vets. And I wrote a book about it. And the book is called Vets for Vets, Harnessing the Power of Vets to Heal. Because they can heal. They have the potential for coming back and being our best citizens, leaders. They know how to follow through on a mission. They know how to have each other's backs and work well on a mission. We need these people in our society, and I was developing ways to help these vets. I wrote this book, and I'm going to tell you what each chapter has to say, just the title to give you an idea about what the book is about. First chapter will tell you how these patriotic enlistees who come into the service wanting to save their country end up as disillusioned and really disturbed veterans. The next chapter talks about all those wrong ways that vets are treated by the VA, by communities, by even their family and friends because they just don't understand. Then I talk about the right way to treat vets, all the things that I've learned, what vets need from family and friends, what they need from organizations that are trying to help them, and what they can do to help themselves. The next chapter talks about the wilderness, what the potential benefits of the wilderness really is for vets. And it's an amazing story that you'll read about, and hopefully it'll encourage you, as well as any vet you know, to get out and enjoy and benefit from what's called Shinrin-yaku by the Japanese, the forest bathing and the benefits that you get from being outdoors. Then I wrote a chapter about what mental health professionals, those of us who are practicing, what we need to learn, what we can learn to help us help these vets and not be like I was back there when I was unsuccessfully treating Vietnam vets. And then I talk about, in the next chapter, the ways that vets themselves can be on a mission to help other vets, a collection of ways that those vets who have come back and have made it or are still making it can help their fellow vets to have their back. The last chapter of the book talks about very specific and practical suggestions for mental health professionals, for family and friends of vets, and for vets. Just a very nice list of things that you ought to consider doing. And that's the story of the book, Vets for Vets. Now on this website, the website you're on right now, you can view an actual excerpt from the book of Vets for Vets, and also there's resources. You can learn where are there useful websites, where are there useful organizations that use techniques that actually help vets. There's a whole collection of those. And then there's a section in this website where people who have read the book want to question something or make a comment about something I said. So they submit questions that are of interest to them, and then I give answers. So on the website, readers ask questions, make comments, and I ask, and you can do the same thing. If you have a question or a comment about any aspect of veteran functioning, put it into the website, and I'll get back to you with comments. And that's my story about Vets for Vets. Thanks a lot for watching.